Week 16 is here and the fantasy playoffs are flying. We're going to walk you through every single game on this week's slate to make sure you're setting the perfect lineups to get you into those finals and hopefully bring home those titles. Tom, we're going to start with a game that 6 months ago probably would have had a 50-point over-under. People have been talking about it as two of the best quarterbacks in the league. Here we are, middle of December. 39.5-point over-under. Two offenses that are sputtering right now. Is this now a defensive matchup?
It might just be. And I tweeted earlier that if you'd have told someone in the summer that when these two quarterbacks faced off in week 16, that they'd be ranked 22nd and 21st in Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings, people would have sent you to jail. Like, it just sounded so implausible. But we've got two of the biggest letdowns at the quarterback position this year. Mahomes is completing only 29% of his deep passes, which ranks 26 out of 29 quarterbacks who've attempted 20 or more. And then you've got CJ Stroud, who's averaging 12.6 points per game since week 4. He's had one 20-point game all year. I believe there's 125 different quarterback performances over 20 points, and Stroud has just one of them. You know, yes, of course, you've got the Nico Collins injury. Stephon Diggs got injured. But that's not good enough when you're looking at guys like Mason Rudolph, who are putting up 20-point games, or players like that. Like, even Daniel Jones had two 20-point games this year. And then you look at how these defenses play. They're two very good defenses. You know, the Chiefs, they rank 12th in pass defense. The Texans, they rank first in pass defense. Now, the Chiefs, they've definitely been on the slide. You can see on the top right there that since week 9, the Chiefs' pass defense ranks 20th in EPA allowed. Their cornerback positions really are a struggle. But I just don't know if anyone's going to be able to sit most of the top guys within this one. Travis Kelce has been really poor of late. Like, his target shares dropped over the first few games. When Rashee Rice left, it was up around 30%, but he seems completely out of gas, and now it's back down at like 20% area. Kelce is third in the league in red zone targets at 21, but he's only had 2 red zone touchdowns. He is not making up for anything this year in the way that he did last year. Then outside of him on the Texans side, Joe Mixon's coming into this off a really disappointing game where he had a season low in rush attempts and rushing yards with only 23, but he was hip dropped. I'm fully expecting the NFL to throw out a hip drop fine this weekend retrospectively, and he did leave the game, and I think he's probably okay here, but the Chiefs aren't a team you particularly want to run on. It's just, it feels like one of those kind of games where you've got to start the players that you have faith in and just really hope for the best.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about players you have faith in. For me, that's Mixon, Collins, and Kelce. And, you know, at this point, Kelsey's like a mid to back end tight end one. I don't feel particularly comfortable with him. Tank Dell, DeAndre Hopkins, Xavier Worthy, they're like flex options for me this week. I think, look, DeAndre Hopkins, if he was playing 90% of snaps and had the same role, I'd be super excited about him. But the truth is that he's playing around 50% of snaps every single week. His targets per route run is great, but he's just not running enough routes to be bankable. So, yeah, he'll probably have an okay day. If he catches a touchdown, it's great, but there's just not the volume that he needs to be getting into our fantasy lineups, quite frankly.
I think you've nailed it, Rich, because you look at Tank Dell and he has one performance higher than wide receiver 41 in his last 5 games. Then you look at DeAndre Hopkins and he's been wide receiver 38, 58, 18, 29, 31, 46. He's flex worthy, but that's about it. And then Xavier Worthy, I mean, I'd be surprised if anyone wants to start him outside of deeper leagues. Like, if you're in traditional formats, it's just been so difficult. And even like getting to a point where, what was it last week? He had 6 targets. He's had 9 targets in the previous games before that. Like, he's involved, but it doesn't feel good.
No, 100%. And I think in terms of the Chiefs' run game, look, it's not something I particularly feel great about either. If Pacheco was, 80% opportunity share, I'd be much more confident. But last year, it was almost like 50-50 split between him and Hunt, and basically means both of them are unstartable and unusable at this point. We may not be live this week, but that doesn't mean we're not answering your questions. If you get them in the comments below, Tom and I will respond and answer 100% of those questions all the way up to games kicking off this weekend. A big one for you this week, Tom. The Ravens potentially getting a game and stopping that tiebreaker against the Steelers. Is this the case? I was looking at this one earlier. I think it could be 0 startable Steelers in this matchup.
Well, the big question will be whether George Pickens is out there, because when he's not out there, the Steelers are bottom 5 in EPA per play. It's such a massive difference. Now, Pat Freiermuth has actually been the most useful he's been all season in these kind of games where George Pickens has been banged up or where he's not played. He's been a top 8 tight end in each of the last 3. The Ravens allow the 11th most fantasy points to the tight end position on the season. So maybe you can start Pat Freiermuth if you didn't have a better option there. Outside of him, look, Najee Harris, 50% rush share last week was a season low against the Eagles. Jalen Warren outsnapped Najee 23-14. It feels like without George Pickens on the field, that they just need a little bit more juice, and they're having to go to Jalen Warren, who we know has more juice than Najee Harris, despite Najee Harris being better this year than he's been in previous years. The Ravens, they've been good against the run all year, but what they've started to turn around since about week 10, week 11, is that they're actually better against the pass as well. Like since week 11, the Ravens, they've just absolutely climbing up DVOA. They were down at 25th in pass defense DVOA around then, and now they're up to 16th. They've really slowed down passes to the deep left or the deep right. They've allowed the 3rd lowest yards per target on those, the 2nd lowest catch rate. And that's where Russ is going. You know, he doesn't want to work the middle of the field. He wants to go outside. So I think there's plenty of reasons to believe that this could be a different game. One thing that is hard to avoid with the Ravens Steelers matchups is Lamar's record against the Steelers, the fact that they've won so many games against the Ravens over the years. But this is Lamar's first home game against the Steelers since 2020. Now, he's missed a few of them through injury, and then he's missed some through sitting at the end of the season. These games always seem to be at the end of the season, and Lamar sat out a couple of those like in week 18, and you've had guys, you know, absolute chumps in there instead. So the record, it's a bit tilted, but Lamar needs this, and the Ravens need this more than ever because, like you say, win this game, Steelers lose to the Chiefs next week, and then all of a sudden the Ravens can win the AFC North. In terms of how the Steelers play, they play the 5th most single high coverage. Lamar's first in QBR versus that since week 11 with 8 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. They blitz at the 7th highest rate over the last 5 weeks, and Lamar ranks 4th in QBR versus the blitz and 2nd in fantasy points per drop back against it. So there's definitely arguments you can build that the tide should turn on this one. In terms of who I'd be willing to start, I think, of course, you're starting Derrick Henry. Zay Flowers has become a little bit frustrating. He hasn't gotten into the end zone much at all lately after that really nice run in the middle of the season. But when you've got Rashad Bateman popping up for 2 touchdowns, Mark Andrews now tied with George Kittle for the most touchdowns among the tight end position, there's only so many touchdowns to go around, even when Lamar's throwing 5 in a game. So I'd still start Zay Flowers. I'd definitely be starting Mark Andrews and Pat Freiermuth. Outside of that, yeah, nobody else feels startable.
Yeah, I think this Steelers game is avoid everyone. Obviously, George Pickens if he's active. Pat Freiermuth, I think if George Pickens isn't active, and I can't get on board with either Steelers running back unless it's that sort of RB3 flex kind of deeper league territory. But the Rams versus the Jets up next. Now, we had a painful week last week with Cooper Kupp. 0 catches, first time in many, many years.
Since 2019.
Well, there we go. Do we see a huge bounce back this week and the ball force fed to him against a Jet secondary that has been beaten up and broken all year, quite frankly?
I don't know if we see it force fed to him, but obviously I'd be incredibly surprised if he ended up with a goose egg again. The Jets haven't been a good defense all year. They've been even more dysfunctional since Robert Saleh was fired. They ranked 27th in EPA per drop back allowed since week 9. Like, Jets are one of those teams like Cleveland where people still attach this idea that because they were really good last year that it might be a tricky matchup, but it just isn't the case. They're ranked 27th in pass defense DVOA. They don't tend to give up massive amounts of fantasy points to the opponents, but that to me feels more about the fact that scoring can be quite low in Jets games typically. Now, the Jets over the last couple of weeks have kind of turned that around, and that's come at the expense of 2 very bad defenses, but the Rams aren't a particularly good defense themselves. They rank 23rd against the pass, 22nd against the run. They allow the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 11th most to wide receivers. So you can get at them, and I think that I wouldn't have any qualms about starting Cooper Kupp. Puka Nakua's had at least a 30% target share in each of his last 6 games. And then on the Jets side, Aaron Rodgers over 290 passing yards in back-to-back games for the first time in about 7 years. And then you've got Devontae Adams looking incredible. Garrett Wilson still seems a bit frustrated at times. Breece Hall sounds like he should be in better shape to go. I don't know why he's playing at this point in a lost season, but fine. If he's out there, I think I have him ranked as my RB 18 currently.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. I think I'm even lower. I think he's about 22 for me. I think you kind of got to start him as an RB2, but I'm not excited about that. My biggest issue with this Jets offense is that what's the one thing we know Aaron Rodgers can't cope with post Achilles injury? Pressure. What's the one thing the Rams defense does phenomenally well? It's got a great front four and it gets pressure at one of the highest rates in the league. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to struggle. I think we may see him just, those ridiculous slot fades and quick outs and slant routes where he basically just catches the ball and releases immediately. I think it could be a high target game for Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams, but I think most of the work is going to come after the catch because I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be running for his life, sadly.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking for a little more push towards Cooper Kupp, the Jets are second in screen yardage allowed per game over the last 5 weeks. So, look, if the Rams are going to lean into their screen game and try and get Cooper Kupp going early, then that could definitely be an avenue for him to have a lot of success.
Absolutely. And remember, just because we're not live doesn't mean we're not answering your questions. Get them in the comments below. We'll answer 100% of them all the way up to kickoff. The battle for Ohio next. No Jameis Winston, sadly, but is there anything exciting about these two disappointing franchises, should we say?
Yeah, disappointing franchises with bad leadership and management, really. But yeah, like the Bengals should keep this one fun because they're first in pass rate over expected over the last 4 weeks. And if the Chargers slip up, the door opens even more for the Bengals to possibly get a place as a wild card team. It's very unlikely, but the Bengals aren't going to lie down and not go for it. I think when you look at this game and you see what the Bengals do well, the Browns really struggle against that. Like the Browns rank 25th against the pass this year. They do rank 17th against the run. So maybe that's a slight ding on Chase Brown. But Chase Brown's been a top 4 running back in 4 out of the 6 games without Zach Moss. Never finished worse than RB9 in that period. He looks like an absolute league winner. And if you've got a best ball roster with Chase Brown on right now, or even just a fantasy roster in general, you're feeling pretty good about yourself. We know Jamar Chase is going to get his. We know that T. Higgins is going to get his. Mike Gesicki is irrelevant now that T. Higgins has been out there and healthy once again. On the Browns side, yeah, DTR starting this game is a kick in the gut because Jameis Winston could have been a lot more fun. I'm generally the fun police when it comes to Jameis Winston, but there's no denying that he would have been a better player for this game than DTR, who over what he said, 3 games over 70% of his snaps last year. And he managed 108 passes for 58 completions. That's a 53% completion rate, 320 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. It just feels to me like the Browns are trying to show up a better draft pick at this point. David Njoku doesn't seem to really be making any progress. Cedric Tillman is taking the longest possible time to come off the concussion protocol. So hopefully he is genuinely okay, but it feels like there's much more at work there. Obviously, no Nick Chubb now, who ranked 4th worst in success rate this year with 41% rating, so he wasn't getting much done. And it opens things up for Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford has scored 10.1 PPR points per game in games without Nick Chubb. He's a flex consideration, and particularly with the Bengals being unable to stop the run, they rank 27th in run defense DVOA. But generally, not many Browns players I'd be excited about starting, which is a shame for Jerry Jeudy, who hit his first 1,000-yard season ever in his career at this point, and it should have been a massive game for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you've undersold how good Chase Brown has been there, Tom. Yes, okay, 4 top 4 running back weeks in 6 weeks. But look, Saquon Barkley has been talked about that he's broken fantasy this year, 22.1 points per game. In games without Zach Moss this year, Chase Brown is averaging 23 points per game. He has been an absolute league winner. He is on a tear. Yes, the Browns defense is good against the run, but I think Chase Brown, he gets involved in the pass game. We saw him with the touchdown last week. I think he is so explosive that even if he kind of gets bottled up for the first 5-6 carries, he can take one to the house from anywhere on the field. So yeah, I'm super excited about Chase Brown this week as a man that's got a lot of dynasty shares and got several best ball shares that are hoping for a big Chase Brown week.
Yeah, I mean, well, since week 9, he's the RB2 in that period. Like, it just shouldn't be understated what Chase Brown's doing. And I really hope that we get a full season of it with the Bengals being competent next year.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Moving across to a slightly less exciting game. Tennessee benched Will Levis, going with Mason Rudolph. The Colts feels like this season is pretty much done with that Jonathan Taylor fumble / drop touchdown last week. Is there anything exciting about this game at all?
I'm really struggling with it. Like, we both liked Anthony Richardson, but I'm really struggling with the whole Anthony Richardson experience these days. I just find him an incredibly frustrating player. I'm not seeing the progression from where we would have liked. I mean, he's failed to complete more than 50% of his passes in 8 of 9 games. That's worse than Tim Tebow. Like, if there's just no bones about it. Richardson has a 47% completion rate on the season. Tim Tebow in his, I think it was the 2011 season or whatever, was 50%. Like, that is just diabolical. And he's not really given us quite enough on the ground to make up for it. Like, if he was going out there and giving us even Jaden Daniels type rushing production, then you could poo-poo it away and you could live with it. But he's not. The Colts, in general, I'm not feeling any of the pass catchers. I think that this Titans team, you can get at them, but not in a way which I think Richardson's going to be able to take advantage of. The Titans allow the second lowest slot yardage per game since week 11, so I don't really want to start Josh Downs either. Jonathan Taylor, he ranks second worst in success rate this year. The only running back he's ahead of qualifying in this is Alexander Mattison, which tells you everything you need to know. He's not been a top 12 running back since week 8. He's not been inside the top since week 3, inside the top 10 when he was RB5 that week. Like, it's just been miserable for him. I'm really struggling trying to work out where I'd feel comfortable drafting Jonathan Taylor in 2025. On the Titans side, we go back to Mason Rudolph, who finished as a top 20 quarterback in 4 games that he started this year, and also finished as QB 13 in week 15 when he came into the game, in the second half. So Mason Rudolph should be fine. Calvin Ridley, he's only found the end zone in 2 games this year. He did hit double touchdowns in both those 2 games, but he just needs to find a little more consistency to be reliable. You can start him here because the Colts, for a poor defense, we know that. We know that you can get at them. But generally speaking, I don't know. I'm not feeling this game.
No, absolutely. And you look at my start sits here: Tony Pollard, Jonathan Taylor, both back end RB2s. Calvin Ridley is a wide receiver 3. Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, maybe as flex options. Like, if you're starting nobody in this game, I think you're in a good place. Like, yeah. I don't like anyone. Anthony Richardson, he's just painful at the moment. I feel like I do a weekly review column that for our members,
which is excellent.
Every single week, I feel like I write the same thing for Anthony Richardson. Like, he still is exactly the same player as he was in week 1. He can make throws that 99% of quarterbacks can't make. He also misses throws that 99% of quarterbacks should make. He just, it's not consistent. You have no idea what he's going to do. And I think the thing is that we'd hoped that the rushing production would buoy him from fantasy. The difference between him and someone like Jalen Hurts, who has similar struggles as a passer, is that Jalen Hurts will go 1 to 2 to scramble. Anthony Richardson has phenomenal athleticism. He is the freakiest athlete we've ever seen in the quarterback position. He's not a scrambler. He sits in the pocket. All of his rushing comes on designed runs. And when he's not getting a huge amount of design runs, it means he's not getting the fantasy production. And that's the issue I have with him as a fantasy quarterback right now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's like, the throws you reference, like, we haven't even seen as many of them over recent weeks. Like, I just feel like, that week 1 bomb 80 yards downfield or whatever it actually was such a long time ago. And there's not been enough for me to continue having faith in him.
Yeah, I mean, last week he absolutely ripped a dig with a, awkward arm angle to Josh Downs. And that's a throw that it looks normal because it didn't look spectacular, but there's no other quarterback outside maybe Matt Stafford that can make that throw. Outside of that, though, he is missing so many simple throws, and I just don't know what to make of him because he's not improving, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, and from a fantasy perspective, he's been QB5, QB20, QB9, and QB15. Like, that is startable, but it can be so miserable watching him because over the last 6 games, 41% completion rate, 31%, 66, 39%, 50%, 44%. It's hard to have fun when you're consistently seeing a quarterback just missing throws.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. We're going to move on, though, to another slightly disappointing quarterback in Kyler Murray, Arizona versus Carolina. Tom, you've talked at times this year. You just don't know what to do with Kyler. You don't know whether to start him. You don't know whether to sit him. You don't know whether he's going to be elite or terrible. How do you feel against the woeful Carolina Panthers defense?
Well, last week I felt really good about Kyler Murray going against the Patriots. I thought that Kyler double stacks were in play because Marvin Harrison's so cheap now that it makes it very viable and very easy to do. And what does he do? He puts up 10.1 points, finishes as the QB 22. Now, part of that's because of James Conner, who we'll come on to. But yeah, there's so little consistency there. Like, over the last 4 weeks, he's rushed for 9 yards, 48 yards, 16 yards, and 11 yards. So again, we're not getting the kind of rushing floor that we'd like. Now, perhaps if Carolina can keep this one spicy, maybe it forces a little bit more. The Cardinals defense, though, has gotten really good across the back end of the season. They went from ranking 28th in EPA allowed per drop back weeks 1 to 8 to second since. That's by Ian Hartit's Fantasy Life. He had that really good stat. And so if the Cardinals defense are keeping things closed down and you got Bryce Young who's unable to show up in the way that he did before the Cowboys game, then I don't have much faith in this one from the Panthers side being able to push Kyler. I think the one thing that we can count on is Trey McBride, who has had 116 targets with 0 touchdowns now. But they really, really want to make this happen for him. He has had 8 red zone targets over the last 4 games, which is the second most among tight ends. And they're at the point where they're even giving him little shovel passes at the goal line, trying desperately for him to get in there. The Panthers, they've allowed 10 tight end touchdowns this year. They've given up loads of fantasy points to the position. So, look, I'm going back to the well. Trey McBride is my tight end 1. Marvin Harrison Jr., I think you can start if you absolutely have to. But as we got on screen there, he's had single-digit points in 8 of 14 games, and he just doesn't look as impressive as he should have for a player who was incredibly hyped coming out of college for all the right reasons. Like, you know, it's not hindsight to go back and be like, oh, yeah, we shouldn't have said this about him, we shouldn't have said that. But it's sad to see that it hasn't really clicked for him in the NFL. Maybe it does next year. James Conner, though, is absolutely a smash this week. Easily a top 5 running back in my rankings. He's had back-to-back season highs in fantasy usage per Hayden Winks, and he was the RB1 in week 15. He's been over 20 points in both the last 2 games, and I think he goes for his 3rd straight one here.
Yeah, very excited about what James Conner is and how he's producing. He's been absolutely fantastic. I say it every week as well. He's so much fun to watch. You talked about Trey McBride being your tight end 1. I'm going to go one step further. He is my start of the week. I feel like if my wife would let me, I'm betting the house on Trey McBride scoring a touchdown this week. It feels so ridiculous. Everyone in the entire Cardinals organization is talking about it. Like it's going to happen. I feel very confident that he's going to find the end zone, and you know that the target volume is going to be massive. If you had a touchdown on top of that, he could be an absolute monster week. From a start six perspective, you know, it's Chuba Hubbard, the obvious names on the Cardinals. I think maybe you can sneak in Thielen and Harrison as a kind of wide receiver 3, but outside of that, this isn't a matchup I'm looking for depth options on.
No, I completely agree. I know some people are excited about Jalen Coker, but like, look, a lot of the production's coming on these big plays at the minute, and you've probably just got to wait and see a little bit longer than this. And at this point in the season, unless you're in a really deep league, that's getting a little too cute anyway.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for maybe like a DFS dart throw, I'm fine with it. In a redraft, you know, managed league, I'd rather bankable volume. And at this point, he's just not getting the volume as much as he's looking good and is explosive. If you have got any start sit questions, though, remember, drop them in the comments below. We'll answer all of them as we head up to kickoff. Detroit versus Chicago. Now, the Lions' defense is absolutely falling apart. We've seen David Montgomery now out as well for the rest of the season, but could this be good things for the Lions offense that's going to have to put up an awful lot of points to bring home W's?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, you just look at the fact that over the last 3 games, the passing volume for the Lions has started to trend up. Like, you go back over the first half of the season, the one thing we were saying that was was being a problem for Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta was the fact that the defense was so much better this year that Goff wasn't having to pass. The defense ranked third in DVOA between weeks 1 to 8, and since then they ranked 25th. So from week 9 onwards, Jared Goff is averaging 38 pass attempts per game as opposed to 26 before that. 12 extra passes per game just elevates everybody's ceiling, everybody's floor in the passing game. It's no surprise that Sam Laporta has been consistently much better for fantasy since around that time. He's retired 8 since week 8, averaging 12.3 points per game. And then you've got Amon-Ra, who, yeah, it's not been quite as spectacular as it could have been, but he's accumulated enough points where you don't feel bad about him. Jahmyr Gibbs in 3 games without David Montgomery, 18 for 82 and 0 touchdowns, 20 for 126 and a touchdown, and 31 for 189 and 1. That was via John Daigle of Established Run. I think that we see a big Jahmyr Gibbs game because you can run on the Bears. You've been able to do that all year. But I also feel good about the rest of pass catching options because the Bears defense has been on the slide. They ranked number 1 in pass defense weeks 1 to 8, and ever since they've ranked 27th, they again have spiraled since getting rid of their head coach. So yeah, there's nothing that really concerns me about the Lions side. On the Bears side, since week 9, DJ Moore, wide receiver 24, Keenan Allen, wide receiver 27. I'd feel fine about playing both of them because the Lions defense is going to struggle. We know they like to play man coverage. They lost their best man coverage cornerback last week. And then the only other question is, do you want to start DeAndre Swift? I don't.
Yep.
RB 32 since week 9, but it's not a problem that I have to worry about because I don't roster him anywhere. I think that even with the Lions injuries, I would still worry about them being pretty tough against the run, and they've allowed only their 6th fewest fantasy points to the position this year.
Yeah, and look, as someone that's going up against Jahmyr Gibbs in my home league, as someone that's only got 1 share in left in best ball, I'm hoping it's a quiet Jahmyr Gibbs week, but it does feel like he's going to absolutely smash. I've got him projected for 22 points this week, Tom. Are you taking the over or the under?
Yeah, I'd go pretty close to that, but I'd just sneak it over. He's my RB3 behind only Saquon and Bijan.
Yeah, it feels like an absolute smash week. Jameson Williams, I think, look, there's not much bankable volume there. He could finish as a top 12 wide receiver. He could finish outside the top 50. I think he's a boom bust wide receiver 3 if ever I saw one. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been the book on him. The volume's been reasonable, but you look back and only, 5 targets last week was the lowest he'd had since week 7. But if there are going to be games like this when you have that many good players, and thankfully for him, he managed to get into the end zone and get a touchdown. He's been a top 36 wide receiver in 4 of the last 5 games. So those are guys that you can start at flex.
Absolutely. Moving on to the Giants versus the Falcons. Obviously, the big news of the week, Kirk Cousins now going to be riding the pine. We finally get to see Michael Penix unleashed. Are you excited about what this could mean for the Falcons offense?
I'm a little undecided. I mean, you know me, I don't watch college, so you have a better idea of what Michael Penix is than I do. But I know that over the last few weeks, I was definitely becoming more and more frustrated with Falcons games. That's an offense which I bet heavily on this year. And they've been dead last in pass rate over expected over the last 4 weeks. Jared Smoller of Draft Sharks called it, a shadow benching of Kirk Cousins before they even put him on the bench, which I thought was a really good way to put it. They just slowly took the game away from Kirk and try to manage things, and it got uglier and uglier to the point where Desmond Ridder is almost beating you, which is just unfathomable to me. So yeah, I agree with the decision. I think it leaves us with a lot of interesting conversations that we can have in the off season. So make sure you subscribed, as we will be getting into all that. But can Michael Penix be any worse for Drake London? Because that's the main thing I care about now. I think Kyle Pitts, I've kind of truly given up on him. But Drake London still has career highs in targets. Yeah. Drake London's got career highs in targets, yards, and touchdowns. I would like to see him finish strong. And Michael Penix supported some really good players in college. He had over 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns in both his last 2 seasons. So there's plenty of reason to believe he can be sustainable. in a way that we're not really seeing from the Giants quarterbacks on the other side. Like Malik Neighbors got home last week on the touchdown against the Ravens, hit a 40% target share for the fourth time this year per JJ Zacharyson. That is what no other wide receiver's done that more than twice. So Malik Neighbors, you can probably start, although it's not an ideal matchup. Tyron Tracy has seen his rush share drop for the last 4 weeks from 75% all the way down to 56%. Devin Singletary had 2 of the 3 carries inside the 5 last week. But I'd probably still consider Tyron Tracy a fringe flex play for now. It just doesn't feel very pretty. But where are you at? Give me some reason to feel optimistic about Michael Penix.
I think, look, this is a guy that is incredibly experienced. Bo Nix is the most experienced college quarterback we have ever seen. Michael Penix is pretty close to that. He's a 6-year player. He produced phenomenally on those Washington teams. I think that this isn't a guy that's being thrown in and that's head's going to be spinning. He's been sitting for 15 weeks. I expect him to come in and be as ready as he can be. He's got great arm talent. He is a really impressive athlete. I think the problem is that we've not seen him run much in college because of those potentially career-ending injuries. He seems to be healthy. There is a potential that there could be some mobility, get him out on those boots that we know that the Shanahan scheme is kind of built around. And I think that he is a much more natural fit right now for this offense than Kirk Cousins with one leg who can't move is. I kind of have this thing where I'm really fascinated by left-handed quarterbacks. As I played with a left-handed quarterback, having spent the last 4 years, the 4 years prior with a right-handed quarterback. And honestly, it's such a different change. Like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but the ball spins the other way. And it is a really different skill catching the ball from a left-handed quarterback to a right-handed quarterback. So I'm fascinated to know how much practice time has he been getting with the Falcons receivers and how much time have they got catching balls off him, because I think it is a different skill. You also see this with Tua has one of the highest dropped interception rates in the entire league, has done over the last 4 years. And yeah, maybe I'm kind of galaxy braining here, but I think that's partly because he's left-handed quarterback and the ball spins the other way and it's hard to catch and that kind of thing. So maybe there's a world where Michael Penix can take a few more risks because it's a little bit hard to bring that ball in. I'm fascinated to see Michael Penix. I really liked him as a prospect. I think he could be phenomenal fit in this offense. And let's be honest, he's not got a hard job. Hand the ball off to Bijan and force the ball to Drake London, and you're probably going to come home with a win against this, quite frankly, horrendous Giants offense.
Yeah, and that's why Drake London's my start of the week for this week, just simply because I feel like what Drake London has been through over the last few months, I'm not like Kirk Cousins was good. There was a period where the Falcons were the 9th ranked passing offense in DVOA. So like we don't need to be completely revisionist history and make it all out to be bad, but it's gone downhill fast. The Falcons, they've had 2 games with a pass rate over expected this year. They ranked 27th in neutral pass rate. I would love to see that come up a bit for this game because this game is there for the taking. The Giants, they ranked 29th on pass defense DVOA. The middle of the field is nearly always open. We talked last week about how their starting safety, who was a rookie this year, 2nd round pick, went on IR. And Lamar Jackson talked after the game last week about how he knew from watching the tape that the middle of the field would be open. That's why he wanted to pepper it with deep shots. That's Drake London to me. He breaks across the middle of the field so often, and I feel like Drake London, we could get a double touchdown week out of him, hopefully.
Fingers crossed. I'm praying for that. And on the Giants side, I would say, I feel like you kind of got to start Neighbors and Tracy, but I feel like with the way this Giants offense is going, one of them is probably going to get home. I don't know if we can guarantee both of them.
No, I agree with that.
Moving on to the Patriots versus the Bills. Now, Tyler and I had a little bit of a chat in the Discord this week. He's a little bit excited about potentially garbage time for this Patriots offense. I just think this Buffalo Bills defense is going to absolutely stifle them. And I wouldn't be shocked if we saw under 10 points scored from the Patriots this week. Are you Team Tyler or are you with me?
Probably somewhere in the middle, just to sit on the fence. But the Bills, they rank 30th in EPA per drop back allowed since week 9, so you can get them. I don't think they are a particularly great defense. They rank 13th in pass defense DVOA over the season, but there just seems to be spots where when they face good teams, they struggle. Now, I'm not saying the Patriots are a good team, but like you look back across the course of the season, and what the Bills have done is really beat up on bad teams. So if the Patriots don't turn up to this one, then they could get absolutely hammered. Josh Allen's first player ever to have 2+ passing touchdowns and 2+ rushing touchdowns in consecutive games. What he's done has been absolutely unreal. 93 fantasy points at this point in the season. Like, that's the thing that championships are made of. So I think that the Bills are definitely hitting their stride at the right time. No Bills player played over a 64% route rate in week 15. I was listening to Underdog yesterday, and Hayden made this great point that going back to when Joe Brady took over the Bills, Stephon Diggs, his involvement dropped at that point, and ever since, the Bills' offense, it's just been an amalgamation of role players, like in matchups, and that they pick and choose who to feature in certain weeks. Like Amari Cooper having a 42% route rate last week was just absurd. But then James Cook, he's not been above 50% snap share in his last 4 games, and I don't know what to do with him because last week I benched him in a very important league, and he still goes for 2 touchdowns. So it's tricky with the Bills, but you lean into the fact that they've got the likely MVP on their team who's playing at a rate which we've just never really seen. And you start the guys that you need to and that you feel confidence in. Like last week, Dawson Knox ran more routes than Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid had a 21% target share, though, and almost had a touchdown that was ruled out. So, yeah, I'm done trying to second guess the Bills. You know, on weeks where I need to start them, I'll start them. On the Patriots side, there's still plenty of second guessing going on here. Ramondre Stevenson started losing work to Antonio Gibson again last week. Gibson and Ramondre split the goal line carries 1 each. Ramondre had only 65% of the running back rush attempts last week. At wide receiver, maybe this is a Pop Douglas week because Buffalo allowed the 3rd most yards to slot receivers since week 11. But part of that comes from the fact that they faced some pretty good slot receivers in that period, guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and, of course, the Rams. The Buffalo red zone defense is poor, though. They've got the worst red zone pass defense since week 11 with 9 touchdowns allowed. Patriots second worst at 8 allowed. So hopefully there's plenty of points in this one, but there's nobody on the Patriots side that I would be excited to start.
No, the only one that's a fringe start for me, I think Hunter Henry said about the Bills' red zone defense. I think that could lead to a Hunter Henry touchdown week. The Bills
it's well overdue, isn't it? Like Hunter
absolutely.
Henry, he's had he's had something like 17 red zone targets, and I think he's only at 2 touchdowns on the entire season. So like he's got there and been a decent fantasy tight end because he has had enough volume to sustain, but he's not been able to turn it into touchdowns, which has been incredibly disappointing. Yeah, 14 targets inside the red zone, 9 catches, and 1 touchdown inside the red zone. So come on, Hunter Henry.
Yeah, it's coming. I feel quite comfortable with Khalil Shakir as a kind of wide receiver 3. But outside of that, you know, Amari Cooper, he's in the DeAndre Hopkins mold of running 50% of the snaps since he was traded. The problem is that he's not seeing the target per route run that DeAndre Hopkins is. So yeah, I don't feel comfortable with him. And basically, I don't think you can trust any Pats receivers. I get what you're saying about Pop Douglas, but talking what wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 for him this week potentially. Hard to trust that on a semi-final.
Absolute desperation type heave.
Yeah. One game I am very excited to watch though: the Eagles versus Washington. Do we think that this could be Jaden Daniels truly establishing himself as the second best dual threat quarterback in the league?
The second best. I don't know where you try to put him there, but that's not happening on any level.
Behind Lamar, ahead of Jalen Hurts.
Well, Jalen Hurts has 3 consecutive seasons with 13+ rush touchdowns now. Like, whether you want to say that he's only bringing his production through touchdowns or not, at a certain point we have to stop guessing the effectiveness of their cheek sneak going forward, because 13 rushing touchdowns in each of the last 3 seasons, I believe he was at 15 last year, 14 already this year. Like, that's fantasy points. So I don't know. I mean, Jane Daniels, he's beat the critiques that I gave him that maybe he'd end up getting a bit too beaten up and that he had too small of a frame to play in this league. and he's been excellent. I think it's been really impressive seeing him, and I'm really hopeful of what he could do next year with Terry McLaurin and T. Higgins as his wide receivers. The Eagles, their defense, we know it's a really good unit. They lead the league in cover 6 rate at 17%, and Jaden Daniels is 22nd in QBR versus cover 6 since week 11. It's not a coverage that he's had much joy against. Last time these two teams met, Saquon Barkley was the RB2 that week. The last 2 weeks against tougher defenses in the Ravens and the Steelers, he's been RB17 and RB30. Obviously, last week he was dealing like banged up and on the sideline. And then the squeaky wheel fully hit with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith having a great week. You can attack the Commanders in whichever way you want. This isn't a good defense towards the start of the season. They look like a better defense. We thought, okay, well, maybe you won't be able to pass on them as much as you used to. They ranked 24th in pass defense DVOA. They ranked 26th in run defense DVOA. So trying to guess how the Eagles would attack this one is a tricky one. I just have more confidence saying that I would start the big four for them. You can start Grant Calcaterra if you need an absolute dart throw, but it's not going to be pretty. And then over on the Commanders side, Brian Robinson had a season high 87% running back rush share in week 15. We know the Eagles are good against running backs, though. They rank 4th in run defense DVOA, allowed the second fewest fantasy points to the running back position. Terry McLaurin, I'd probably feel better about starting than Brian Robinson. Per Josh Norris, TMC had 11 red zone touchdowns in 80 games before this year, and he's had 9 already. He's also set a career high in touchdowns at 11 and yards per target at 10.5. So outside of that, I don't think there's anything too controversial with this one.
No, it feels pretty straightforward. You know the guys you're starting. It's the core 4 in Philadelphia, and then Daniels, Robinson, McLaurin for Washington. And I wouldn't touch anyone else. I get what you're saying. Maybe Grant Calcaterra if he can score a touchdown, but we're in desperation mode there. Yeah, absolutely. Moving across to the Vikings versus Seattle. I was very excited for this one, potentially being a really exciting game. And then Geno Smith goes and gets injured. I do worry about him lacking mobility behind this woeful offensive line against, we say it every week, a very blitz-happy, creative defense. This feels like this could be a really, really tough gig for Geno this week.
Yeah, and he's just had no help whatsoever from his offensive line this year, and it's gotten better over periods when they've been healthier, but I would very much worry about him. The Vikings, they blitz at the highest rate in the league, like you said. Geno ranks 16th in QBR versus the blitz over the last 5 games. So it's hard to imagine him really turning it around there. JSN sees a 35% first read target share when teams blitz, so you can probably lean towards him. JSN's had a 25% target share in general over the last 5 games, with DK Metcalf at 20%, Tyler Lockett all the way down at 7%. So that passing game has flattened out, and we know what to expect for the most part there. In terms of the running back position, it sounds like Zach Charbonnet is now banged up and might miss this game. Kenneth Walker could come back and play. Running on the Vikings hasn't been something that's been particularly productive for teams this year. They've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the position. Their run defense ranks number 3 in DVOA. It's easier to pass on the Vikings. They do give up passing yards. They've got a very good pass defense, but they've allowed the most fantasy points to the position because teams struggle to run, so instead they have to pass the ball. So I'd be okay starting JSN and DK. I'm not overly high on anyone else on that side. On the Vikings side, TJ Hawkinson has now entered kind of problematic territory for me. He has 1 finish higher than tight end 10 in the last 7 games. I believe he's not scored a touchdown yet as well, and we keep seeing the other tight ends mix in for the Vikings. Aaron Jones has kind of put his fumble issues behind him a little bit, had touchdowns in 4 straight games. Justin Jefferson looking fantastic. And then Jordan Addison, wide receiver 6 since the start of week 11, is somebody I think you have to start now until you see a reason not to. Sam Darnold, I gave him plenty of shit earlier on in the season and even just a few weeks ago, but he's been a QB1 in 6 of the last 7 games, so I don't mind starting him. But I always hate it when I come to do my rankings and I kind of realize, yep, I'm going to have to put Sam Darnold in the top 12.
You never feel good about it. You just got to close your eyes and click it in. On the TJ Hawkinson point, look, he's coming back from a serious injury. I think the challenge is that when he was at his best, he was a 90% plus snap share guy. He's been under 75% every single game so far since the return of the injury. I think That's the difference, is that he's not on the field every single play. Yes, he's running the majority of routes, but just that little bit off the top is kind of taking him from a top 3-4 tight end into that sort of 6 to 12 range. And it's someone that you feel okay starting, but you don't feel particularly great about. DK Metcalf, since he's come back from injury, I'm sorry, I don't think he's fully fit. I don't think he's fully healthy. I think he's still carrying some niggles. He doesn't look as explosive, which is weird for a freak of an athlete like DK Metcalf. Are you comfortable starting him? I've got him in that kind of wide receiver 3 range.
Yeah, and for anyone who thinks that's kind of a bit low, I mean, you kind of need to go and look at the stats. Like the last 3 weeks, he's been wide receiver 38, wide receiver 41, and wide receiver 63. He's only had one double-digit PPR game in the last 4 games. So very much agree with you. Like I was talking earlier on in the year about how much extra yak DK was getting, because over the first 6 weeks of the season, he was averaging 30 yards of after the catch. And since then, he's averaging 9.5. Like, it's just not happening like that. And the game's just swung towards JSN. So I think I'm okay starting him, because the Vikings tend to give up a lot of work to the outside rather than across the middle as much. And the Vikings also allow the 3rd highest yard per target on 3rd downs. So, like, there's enough cope within the matchup stats that I feel like you can start him. But if you've got him on your team, you probably know by now that you're not going to feel necessarily very good about it.
Yeah, and also on that point, Stephon Gilmore has practiced this week. Stephon Gilmore is not the player he once was, but he is still a physical freak and a very big, strong guy. If anyone can handle someone like DK Metcalf, this is the kind of player that Stephon Gilmore made Defensive Player of the Year campaigns out of shutting down. So yeah, very excited about potential matchup there. Remember though, if you are agonising over those last few start-sit decisions before your semi-final matchup, get them in the comments below. Tom and I will give you our thoughts, give you the answer, and help you make the right decision to get you through to that final. San Francisco versus Miami, the battle of Shanahan versus the apprentice. Mind you, this is 2 of the most disappointing offenses in the entire league this year. Where do you see this one going?
Well, it's probably most interesting when we look at the running back position, I guess, because the Niners, you can run on them. They've been quite poor against the running back position all year. They allow the 12th most fantasy points to the running back position. In terms of where they rank in DVOA, they're a top 12 unit in every facet, apart from run defense, where they rank 19th. On the Miami side, they, again, are a poor run defense. They rank 24th. So maybe we get Isaac Guerrero and Devon Achane looking like the next big things. But yeah, I think we probably have to touch on the fact that Debo is just, I'm going to say it, one of the most disappointing picks in the top 3 rounds of fantasy drafts this year. And that comes from somebody who spent a lot of time hyping him up. Like, he had the perfect sudden run out. Like, he was gifted Brandon Ayuk being out of shape and having not trained all off season, and he'd looked out of it. He wasn't particularly good when Ayuk was out there. Since Brandon Ayuk went on injured reserve, Brandon Ayuk has 278 total yards and is the wide receiver 78 in that period. It is just, it's been so awful. I've been working on some predictive ADP for next year, try to work out where I would draft certain people, and Debo Samuel is somebody I can't see myself drafting inside the first 6 rounds. Maybe we get an off-season where they talk about the fact that the pneumonia really affected him more than he was letting on, but I just think he's just looked really bad.
You find him on a new team, and you have to
exactly that.
Work out what his usage is going to be in that scheme.
And why would you not move Debo on at this point? Because Juwan Jennings averaging a 30% target share over the last 6. He's looked better than Debo and better than Ayuk did at any point this season. You've got Ricky Pearsall you want to develop. Maybe George Kittle can continue to roll back the years next year as well. 8 touchdowns this year is tied for the most among the tight end position. In terms of the Miami stuff, since week 11, San Francisco allowing 90% catch rate in the red zone. They've given up 6 touchdowns on 10 targets. So hopefully we get a good bit of the Miami passing the ball as well as Devon Achane. Like, San Francisco played the 6th most zone coverage, 2 is 3rd in QBR versus zone. So there's no reason for me to shy away from it on that side. But I doubt you're going to want to start Waddle with him dealing with this injury. It might be that he doesn't even play because Miami are out of it for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, I've not ranked Waddle this week. I'm a little bit intrigued if he doesn't go in Malik Washington in kind of DFS and super deep leagues. But he's not a top 50 wide receiver. Tua, borderline startable. I think I've got him QB 13, so would maybe consider that. But I don't think you want to get too interested in this game. I don't think it's going to be a particularly high scoring one. Talking of high scoring games, though, Jacksonville versus Las Vegas. We're looking at a sub 40-point over-under. Again, it's the most interesting thing in this game, Tom. Who's going to lose and therefore get a high pick in next year's draft?
I just don't really care about that. All I care about is the two rookies in this game, Brock Bowers and Brian Thomas Jr. Give me production from them, and that's all I care about. Brian Thomas Jr. is averaging over 20 PPR points over his last 4 games, leads all rookies in receiving yards. He is the wide receiver 9 in total points now, which kind of snuck up on me. I don't tend to look at total points for the positions too often, but when I saw that, it was just like, fair play. He's heading towards 1,000 yards. He's done really well despite the dysfunction there. And then Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is second in receiving yards among all rookies, which, given the strength of this class, is really impressive. Did only have 35 yards last week, which was his lowest since week 4. But that was a Desmond Ridder stat rather than a Brock Bowers stat. And thankfully, it sounds like Desmond Ridder will not be starting this week. And we're back to Aiden O'Connell, who understood the assignment. He gets the ball out to Jacoby Myers. He gets the ball out to Brock Bowers. And that's about it. We saw Sincere McCormick land on injured reserve, which was a shame for him. It felt like, you want to see these guys when they get chances, at least have a fair crack at it. Lands on injured reserve, and immediately we are back to Amir Abdullah, who saw 10 touches to Alexander Mattison's 9 in week 15. If this one stays in a more positive, neutral game script, I think we see more Alexander Mattison than we do Amir Abdullah, but you probably don't want to start either. That's kind of DFS category only. Travis Etienne outsnapped Tank Bigsby 61-22 in week 15. I'm just done trying to guess what's going on with the Jaguars backfield. It's just one which it's not overly productive, so why worry about it anyway? Maybe one of them gets a touchdown and you're just like, oh, there's bench points. But no, leave it on your bench and just don't worry about it. Brendan Strange, 82% route of dropbacks last week, 27% target share, only 3,500 on DK this week, which is a real smash. And Fantasy Game Day, I'm assuming that we'll be talking about him when we get into that video. And I just look at him and I just think, I don't see anything that Evan Ingram does that Brendan Strange doesn't do.
I think he's more explosive and more athletic and a better all-round player than Evan Ingram. But don't tell anyone I said that. Look, you're starting the 3 pieces of Brian Thomas, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, and I don't want anything to do with anyone else in this matchup under any circumstances. If you're relying on Travis Etienne or Amir Abdullah at a semi-final,
no. What semi-final?
I'm gobsmacked if it's redraft, and if it's dynasty, go and buy someone because you don't want to be starting them.
It's the toilet bowl semi-final.
Absolutely. Tampa Bay versus Dallas. This is a game that feels fun, exciting, and plenty of points. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I put out a stat on Twitter yesterday that Tampa Bay blitz at the second highest rate since week 11. Well, Cooper Rush ranks 3rd in fantasy points per drop back against the blitz. Cooper Rush, he came in, looked a little up and down, but then settled down back into the kind of player that we saw a couple of years ago when he was making starts. He's been fine. He's been getting the ball to CeeDee Lamb. He's been keeping Rico Dowdle able to rush the ball, and Dowdle set career highs in rush attempts and rush yards last week with 25 rush attempts for 149 yards. He's been over 100 yards in 3 straight now, ranks 1st in success rate ahead of Derrick Henry. Now, success rate isn't the most glitzy stat. It's basically, can you pick up, 3-4 yards on a first down, and can you stay on track like that? But Rico Dowdle's been good. I think that we probably don't get a 2025 campaign out of him where he has this many touches to himself. But for now, we can just keep riding it. Lamb's been back-to-back games as a top 12 wide receiver and been over 20 points in both of them. It's not quite the 30-point ceilings that we'd love, but we can live with it. Jake Ferguson, complete disappointment, outside the top 20 tight ends in the last 4 games. There just isn't enough going his way for him to be relevant. On the Bucs side, Baker's set career highs in passing touchdowns and yards per attempt, also set career highs in completion rate at around about 70% compared to a previous high of about 60, 66%, I think it was. Mike Evans only needs 84 yards per game for 1,000 yards on the season. That feels inevitable. Jalen McMillan's really separated as the wide receiver 2 at this point, 40 points across the last 2 games. And then Bucky Irving, despite being banged up and potentially missing last week, still had 15 carries. It feels like if you've got any of these guys, you can start them, because the Cowboys, they'll have the 4th most fantasy points to the QB position, the 6th most to running back, the 10th most to wide receivers. Tampa, they'll have the 2nd most to quarterbacks, the 9th most to wide receivers, and the 6th most to the tight end position. 2 bad defenses, but they still play fairly fast and they still like to pass the ball. So it's a recipe for sneaky upside.
Yeah, lots of guys that you want to start in this one. I guess the questionable one, Rashad White, I've got him, I think, RB25, so kind of borderline RB2, RB3, whether you slink into a flex. Are you happy rolling with him this week, or are you a little bit nervous that Bucky gets the majority of the work?
Yeah, I don't mind, because I think the Cowboys blitz at such a high rate that they force a lot of first read passes, and that's probably where Rashad White would get most of his work anyway. And yeah, I mean, Baker's banged up. He's going to want to get the ball out quickly. So I don't mind it. I don't feel incredibly excited about it, but yeah.
No, it makes sense. Well, New Orleans versus Green Bay is up next. Josh Jacobs has been absolutely tearing it up. This Saints team is pretty much in Mexico on holiday already. Could this be a Josh Jacobs carry you to a fantasy title stretch?
Yeah, and as you said, he's tearing it up. Top 10 running back in 6 of the last 7 games. He's been, over 20 plus points in 7 of the last 8 games. He's just been really impressive. Positive touchdown regression came for him in a way which you said that it would earlier on in the season. I was a bit more skeptical because we've had such a big history of Josh Jacobs just going missing at times, but he's been great. I feel better about him than I do anyone else on the Packers. Christian Watson's had a 22% target share over the last 6, but he's still incredibly volatile. Jaden Reed has been wide receiver 35 or worse in 4 of his last 5 games. When I came to do my rankings, start off with the template of where the current expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros were, and I think he was at wide receiver 28, and I just had to move him down to outside the top 36 for me. He's my wide receiver 37, and I would look for excuses to play anyone over him. I just feel really disappointed that we haven't seen him kick on from how he was over the first few weeks of the season. Now, you can do whatever you want against the Saints. Like, they are a poor defense. They rank I've lost the numbers right in front of me. They rank 27th against wide receiver 2s. They rank 1st against wide receiver 1s. They rank 30th against the run, though. So is this just going to be Josh Jacobs and the Green Bay pass catchers don't get there? That's kind of how I lean towards it, and I'm probably not desperate to start too many of them. On the Saints side, MVS, it's just kind of getting a little ridiculous now, but he's been wide receiver 25 since the start of week 10. And I think if you're in deeper leagues, he's shown enough where you can start him, particularly if Spencer Rattler ends up being the starter. Alvin Kamara, it feels like he might end up getting shut down. He isn't that far off getting his first 1,000-yard rushing season. I wonder how much that means to him. Kendry Miller had only 1 touch before Kamara left the game last week, but then had all 9 after that. He very much is the RB2 there, and is an okay start if you need to. But the Packers, they've got the 8th best run defense in the league according to DVOA, and they've allowed the 17th fewest fantasy points for the position.
Yeah, I think the issue with this Packers offense is there's too many mouths to feed, and for fantasy, you never know who it's going to be. So it's, start Josh Jacobs. I think Jordan Love, this is a decent matchup for him, but it's dart throws at the 4 wide receivers and Tucker Kraft, quite frankly. I'm not too comfortable starting MVS in a game you've got to win. I think, DFS maybe is a dart throw. But
deep leagues, deep.
Yeah, we're talking very deep. Start 6-7 wide receiver deep.
Yeah.
But I don't love Kendry Miller. Even if Alvin Kamara doesn't go, I still think he's in that RB3 flex territory for me. Final matchup on the week, though, tonight's game, Denver versus the Chargers. Now, I was looking at this start sits. I think there's 3 startable players in this, and that is it. I don't want any part of this matchup outside of those 3.
Yeah, it's like Justin Herbert's kind of tailed off a little bit over recent weeks. He was looking fantastic, getting those kind of, if Justin Herbert carries on like this, he could be an MVP type whispers, and then it just goes down the toilet. And of course, part of it comes down to the fact that he's banged up, but part of it comes down to the fact that if you've got such a narrow passing tree, you can't afford for anyone to get hurt. So when Lad McConkey starts getting banged up and dealing with issues like that, it gets tougher. And when teams remove somebody like him from the game plan, it gets tougher. I'm not expecting Hayden Hurst coming off IR to change anything for Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert had 3 straight games as the QB 16 or worse, so I wouldn't be starting him. McConkey, you start him. He's averaging 95 yards per game over his last 4. And for as good as the Broncos are, you can get at them. You can pass them. We know they're going to play a lot of man coverage. Is Patrick Surtain going to follow Lad McConkey? We have seen a little bit of him trailing in and out of the slot this year. Kamani Vidal, 35 snaps in week 15 versus 15 combined for Gus Bus and Haskins. Like, it's all just miserable. The running game, like, if you want to run a Harbaugh, Greg Roman offense, the first thing you should do is make sure you have good running backs. And outside of J.K. Dobbins, they just don't. Snow Smart had a 19% target share in week 15. Maybe I'd take shots on him in showdown contests or on fantasy game day if you're looking at the ballers contests. Go back to the Denver side. Cortland Sutton, 8+ targets in all of his last 7 games. Of course, you're starting him. He's been very good this year. Bo Nix, dead last in QBR versus man coverage over the last 4 weeks. That's something which the Chargers do like to deploy at times. So it could be a little bit sticky for him. The Denver running back room, I'd put here on the slides that it continues to be a mystery box every week. But Jaleel McLaughlin's been ruled out for this one. So maybe a slimmed down running back room makes it a little easier to predict. But the last thing I'm going to do if my path to a fantasy championship is on the line, I'm not starting Javonte Williams or Audric Estime. That's much more like DFS or perhaps prop bets that I'd look at.
Yeah, it does feel like it could be a Javonte Williams week, which means you don't want to start Javonte Williams because Sean Payton's probably going to pull the rug. And yeah, maybe we can see Blake Watson or something like that get the bulk of the carries. I think, look, let's keep it simple. It's Sutton, it's McConkey, and it's maybe Bo Nix, and that is it. I want no other part of this game. And I think anything else, you're just reaching.
Yeah, I mean, Bo Nix just hasn't been particularly great over the last couple of weeks. What, 12.2 fantasy points in week 13 and then 13.5 coming off the bye last week against the Colts. So, like, those games came against the Browns and the Colts. They aren't tough defenses. The Chargers are definitely a bit of a tougher defense, but they have been on the slide recently. So, if I've got a better option, I'd be taking it.
Absolutely. And that is it. The week 16 preview is in the books. Whilst you're there, hit the like, hit the subscribe. Best of luck in the semi-finals. And of course, we will see you next week, ready for those finals to bring home the titles.